Hello, listeners. My name is Raj Singhal, and welcome to another episode of Breaking Investment Stereotypes. This episode is brought to you by Multiply.co, where we believe that investing is an ignored life skill. Our mission is to create a platform where people can come learn, share, and collaborate through the right tools. Ultimately, we want your hard earned money to work for you. Here at Breaking Investment Stereotypes, my job is to deconstruct world class investors or wealth managers and deep dive into their investing journey professionally, personally, or both, to get into how they've broken the stereotypes in a seemingly complex world of investing. I want to give little guidance on how to use the shows. None of the following should be taken as an investment advice. Please see multiply.co/disclosures for more information. My guest for today is Alok Jain. Alok is a New Delhi-based SEBI registered investment advisor and founder of a momentum investing service called weekendinvesting.com. Alok is an engineer from IIT Delhi and an MBA finance from University of Maryland. He returned to India to start his journey in the markets by setting up one of the first National Stock Exchange membership in New Delhi in 1996. In the next 2 decades, Alok developed a keen sense for systematic, rule-based investing systems and technical trading. He is a keen observer of the psychology and behavioral aspect of the market and wanted to quantify and incorporate them in his investing. Weekendinvesting.com is a do-it-yourself advisory where Alok provides simple momentum-based investing models. The unique part about his strategies is the low time spent to returns ratio, where the user spends up to 15 minutes a week to attend to their portfolio, and the returns have so far been beating the benchmark by a huge margin. He also runs a hyperactive Twitter feed at @weekendinvesting to share his trading thoughts with a larger Twitter group. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Alok Jain. Hey Alok, welcome to the show. Let me begin with your personal side of the story. You did your engineering from IIT Delhi and masters in biotech in US, and also did your MBA from US. How did you land from there to a prominent face in Indian momentum and trading scene?
Hi Raj, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. The story goes back to 1995, where I was in the US and I was pursuing a master's in finance and an MBA program at University of Maryland. And this new opportunity was coming up in the Indian market for opening up of the National Stock Exchange. And they invited professional members to apply for the membership. So it was like a startup at that point of time. So got together with a few investors, family investors mostly, and we applied for this membership. And I flew down from there and gave a business presentation to the NSE board. At that point of time, it was a very high-tech presentation where users would sort of call in to the brokerage house and do the trades online. So it was a bit ahead of time for that time. They were reasonably convinced that a person without any experience can also possibly do this with his professionalism, and they offered the membership right there. So that started the journey of basically moving back to India and setting up this National Stock Exchange membership in Delhi and a small office in Mumbai. Initially, we started off with institutional broking. So there was a lot of research reports coming out of our company, and basically a lot of networking with the institutions. That kind of a transaction happened. Then over time, it transformed into more of a retail-oriented brokerage house, and that over time, I think the next 20 years of its life, I saw so many retail clients doing all kinds of investing and trading, and I was also developing a keen sense of how what is working and what is not working for people, and that drew me towards more of trading, or basically rule-based systematic approach to the markets. So that's what gradually kept sort of simmering underneath, and I developed certain strategies purely for my clients at that point of time to help them give more value add to the brokerage business, because brokerage business was kind of going down the tube since mid 2000s, especially after the discount brokerages came in post 2008. So unless you were able to do a lot of value add, it was difficult to justify that kind of a setup. So that's where we sort of went into systematic way of investing slash trading. And post my giving up of the brokerage business in 2012, 13, somewhere like that, I started concentrating on developing strategies for running my own small capital, and doing that for myself. Um, that gradually transformed into a very boring and very lonely sort of adventure, because earlier, at least at the corporate setup was there, 15, 20 employees, thousands of clients, and you're all the time busy with some communication and interaction. And here suddenly, you're sitting in one room in your house, and you're doing a strategy which only requires you 5 minutes of input a week, and there's nothing left to do for the entire week now. Nobody to even talk to, or nobody to even advise anything. So that probably, if I'm trying to remember, that probably pushed me towards spending some more time on social media. And I happened to go to Twitter for this, and I started to just broadcast what I was doing on Twitter. So there was one strategy that I started live on Twitter in 2016. Uh, uh, that strategy, I basically every week religiously I was updating what is happening in that strategy, and it was free for anybody who wanted to ride along that strategy, and that went on for a year. And fortunately, that was a good year for small and mid caps, and we got about 52% return on that strategy in that year. And so there was a lot of Twitter buzz around this strategy, that what is this guy doing, and he's generated 52% of return, and some media picked that up. So there were some articles written on what is momentum investing and what is weekend investing doing, like that. So that's where sort of the ball started rolling, and I took up a SEBI registration, and I rolled out the same products which I was running my own capital on for others, and that's what I've been doing for the last 4 5 years now.
That's very interesting. And before we delve deep into it, I just very interesting. I want to understand. You name your platform as Weekend Investing, and as far as I understand, markets are closed over the weekend. So what's the logic and reasoning behind this whole weekend? I think your Twitter handle is also goes by the same name as well.
Yes, the Twitter
First of all,
handle is
yeah.
the Twitter handle is Weekend Investing, but I didn't get the Twitter handle as that, so there's an I missing in there. But uh, yeah, I mean, so after the transactional business, one was looking forward to enjoying life 6 days a week, and maybe working on one day for a few hours. And so the concept was that you know just before the weekend, you take whatever decisions are required for the investing, and then that's it. I mean, that, and you're done for the entire week. So that's where sort of the weekend investing concept name came through for me. That let me coin is some term for what I'm doing, and structure to what I'm doing, even if I were doing it for myself. And I named that name, and I thought it was a pretty silly sort of a name, but it and but it does create a lot of curiosity for people who hear it for the first time.
It does, and Tim Ferriss made this 4 hour week very popular. I mean, he's a very popular podcaster, right?
Yes.
So probably I think he picked up from you, I guess, looks like to me. He followed you, seeing what you did. Now let's little bit dwell more deeper into it. And you also run a small case portfolio for your investors, which seems to be very popular. We would also go into the story behind this whole small case. I think you have a very interesting story, the way I think you wrote to them, and how did that came into being. So maybe you want to talk about that, and also tell our listeners more about your strategy and whatever you want to talk about on that.
So essentially, I started out with 3 or 4 strategies in 2016, which were obviously do-it-yourself strategies, and you could use any brokerage house to run those strategies. And those strategies essentially were all my strategies basically are based on the momentum engine. So momentum is basically an anomaly which has not gotten explained in the last so many hundreds of years. A lot of research has gone into this. International, research is there where this phenomena remains unexplained. Uh, and not just unexplained, the momentum performance has remained far superior than any other format of investing. In terms of there have been studies on this by various research houses, various consultancies, where they found that over years and decades, this format of investing has beaten all other formats, whether it is value investing, growth investing, or other kinds. So this was very intriguing, and it was very logical for me, coming from that engineering background. And I frankly I would tell you that I did try a lot of fundamental investing initially, but somehow it did not gel with my maybe I was too close to the market as a broking house also. So it was difficult to have a very long term view when you're so close to the transaction, and you tend to have more shorter term focus. And so essentially the whole idea of having a logical way of investing, and having done both investing and trading extensively on both sides, I tried to marry the best concepts from both sides into this. So from investing, the portfolio approach, of having diversification in within the portfolios or across various portfolios, and from trading, having a concept of position sizing, having a concept of risk management, and having sort of a very clear trading rules where there is no ambiguity at any decision point. So my essence, the essence of what I was doing was that I should be clear about four things basically: what to buy, when to buy, how much to buy, and when to sell. So these four things should be crystal clear at all points of time: at time of entry, at time of holding it, at time of exiting it. So that the rules are, not making you feel inadequate in times of stress. So the main advantage that I found in running such strategies was that whether markets are going high, whether markets are going low, because at least over the years, I have developed a lot of confidence in these strategies. I never feel, that I'm feeling uncertain about the future, or maybe my back is against the wall. What should I do? So that clarity is there, that this is what I need to do, and that clarity basically helps you, with a good night of sleep. So that's sort of the bottom line on that. So these four strategies that I started out, they were basically with focusing at various sub segments of the market. So one strategy was focused at small caps, another was there with a mix of small caps and mid caps. Yet another one was at focusing only on the top large cap stocks. So these strategies were going on 16, 17, 18. And then and we had reasonable success in terms of a lot of clients using these strategies and generating returns. 2018 was a bad year where we got a smash down on the small caps and mid cap stocks, and that's when somehow I got introduced. In fact, I came to know about small case through Nitin Kamat of Zerodha, and I had been using Zerodha since I gave up my own brokerage house, and I really found that his way of dealing with things and his way of setting up things was really very transparent, very straightforward. I really liked his work. So in some conversation he did mention about small case, and so I wrote to Vasant, the CEO at Small Case, and I asked him, what he was doing, and kind of proposed that, if you're doing portfolios of yourself that you're creating yourself, why don't you also host portfolios from registered entities, SEBI registered entities, I don't know if that was the starting point of their thought on this, or they were already thinking about this. But within the next 3 to 6 months, they created a beautiful platform called Publisher, and they all started onboarding, SEBI advisors like me. I was the first one, the guinea pig on their platform, and and then I mean they have not looked back since then. So that was sort of the backstory on the small case start. But small case uh, uh, essentially provided scale to what I was doing individually on my own. So the reach suddenly was went manifold, and the processes that they have for onboarding and for all kinds of support, etc., so on and so forth, essentially made my mom and pop store basically have a storefront which could cater to hundreds and thousands of people. And once that happened, then we started also doing more research in house, and started out but some more strategies. One of the very popular strategies that has been on for a couple of years is called an all-time high strategy. uh, so 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 this is one very unique sort of you can say subset of momentum investing, in the sense that momentum investing can also be done in 50,000 ways, just like value or fundamental investing. There are so many ways of doing this. So there is no one way of doing momentum investing as well, and there could be variations as per the practitioners. So all-time high investing is another sort of subset of this, wherein you are chasing stocks that are hitting all-time highs. And there has been numerous studies on this as well. That stocks that are doing all-time highs tend to retain momentum in a significant way until they don't. So there can be strategies which can be built around this concept itself. So we did that, and that strategy has done extremely well in the last 4 or 5 years, 2 or 2.5 years, I think, on some small case, and 5 years since inception. Um, so these are the sort of few strategies. Then there are all the strategies which cater to entire market cap. All kinds of stocks that are available on the market. So there are 7, 8 such strategies which have a bouquet where people are able to spread their portfolio across, have several portfolios, and diversify across the entire market, so as to say.
So I'll come to, I mean, talking a little bit deeper into some of them. I mean, not the strategy part, but just the whole momentum trading as well. And you've been doing this for, at least 4 or 5 years. Have you seen a big drawdown? I mean, you mentioned about 2018, 2020. Again, we saw the big, when the virus hit, market dropped a huge amount. So, what kind of drawdowns you would have seen, and how did you cope and recover from that? And actually, there would be a follow-up question on that, is that because of them, and if they have happened, have your trading style changed, given that, such a big event had happened in the market?
So most of the strategies, the way I go about them is that, first of all, they have to be extensively back tested on, let's say, last 20 years of data. So in Indian market, we have good data available for about, I think, 25 years now, especially since NSE started. We have a good data for our markets. So rigorously testing out, what your strategy would have done in the 2004 crash, in the 2008 crash, what it would have done in the lull periods in 2010 to 13, what it would have done in 2016 at Demon, or 2018 small cap crash. So all these are various events which are available, and more than that, even global events, 9/11, or all other kinds of global events are there. So once you've rigorously tested such impactful events, there is not much scope left for any surprises as such. So you are expecting some drawdown, and it depends upon the design of the strategy. So you could have strategies where the drawdowns would be very limited, but then your churn may go up. So you'll have stocks which drop out very frequently, but then you have to add in more frequently as well. Or you could allow more room for those stocks to play, and then that would have a larger drawdowns at times, but then there will be lower churn. So it depends upon the design of the strategy. So in our small case strategies, for instance, in 2018 crash, I think the small case index went down like 65%. We drew down maybe like 35% or 37%. In March to 2020, most of the large and mid caps also fell down about 25 to 30%. We were down maybe like between 15 to 20%. So the ability to go to cash. So in all our strategies except one, we basically will go to cash if the market is adverse. So if there is no alternative opportunity of higher momentum available, the capital will go sit in cash, and that creates the unique advantage in my view. So if the market is going from 100 to 60 and you are out at 80, and you're sitting there, so when the market starts to revive from 60 to 100 and it goes up, let's say 40%, 50%, you are sitting at a higher base, and if you are able to capture some part of that rise, you'll be ahead of the market. So outperforming while you're going down and outperforming while you're going up, these two actually combine and create a magic that momentum investing provides. So many strategies in the March 2020, in our case, even the small and mid cap strategies like MI50, we have one here, drew down only 5% because they very quickly went into cash, because the market was simmering before this crash. It wasn't really in high momentum. So the exits were getting closer and closer to the price before the crash, and hence as soon as the crash started, these strategies exited and sat on cash for a month and a half, and by mid-April they started picking up stocks again. So when there is a deep crash and a V-shaped recovery, momentum strategies will lag initially in the pickup stage, because by the time the momentum is established, the market is already off 10, 20, 30% from the bottom, and you are picking up stocks at that point. So initially within the start of a new cycle, you can say there is a lag, but then it catches on very fast. Like all-time high strategy did 180% in this last 1 year. I mean, it's a phenomenal sort of number that is at times unbelievable. I mean, what kind of a portfolio can do that? So these are sort of some of the things that are there in terms of drawdown. So again, depending upon your design, you could design it to have very tight drawdowns or very large ones.
I will come to the question on now. If somebody who's like coming up and want to learn about investing, learn about trading, how does he decide that he's a better, say, momentum trader or a better fundamental trader? And then within fundamental, now you have this whole value and growth investing. Is there, you have any framework, or is it purely trial and error?
I don't think I have a good answer for that. I think one will have to dip their feet in most of these things and see what clicks for them. In the sense, every person is built differently. They think differently. They have different risk sort of acceptance scenario, and the same shoe doesn't fit all, basically. So you need to pay some sort of tuition to the market, a learning fee, try out various things. And I'm seeing that the learning curve for many youngsters is very, very fast. I mean, I'm seeing on Twitter, youngsters 20, 25 years of age having more knowledge than what I have been able to acquire in 25 years. So I think they can really do it fast now with the kind of information and resources available online, and very quickly, within, let's say, half a decade, they can probably dip their feet into all kinds of things and then start to build what is their comfort zone.
Yeah. So I'll say, I think you also followed, read about this guy called Jesse Lee Moore, and he said that only the game can teach you the game. So I think
Yes.
at the young age, uh, you have the advantage of having less money. I mean, you may
Yes.
call it a disadvantage. I will call it an advantage because you have
Yes.
less money. You will have less money to lose, right?
Yes.
So I think you should always try and learn about things by putting up your own money in a smaller way. And now many things are easily available in a smaller way, right? You can trade smaller
Yes.
and learn your own thing, and which will teach you so that when you have more money, you'll have a better discipline and better strategy around trading that.
Absolutely. So I think there's not much of risk when you are so young.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you blow up a few times initially, and you're spending all what that you're saving into some sort of learning, and you're maybe spending more money on gaining knowledge through maybe some specialized coaching, tutoring, whatever. So I think those kind of spends are really good, and I'm seeing a lot of youngsters are doing that. They are not really worried about returns from day one. I mean, they're
Mm-hmm.
happy to spend more on learning things and trying out new things, and then maybe at some later stage start to build on that.
One more question which comes to everybody's mind, right? People say, there are a lot of people and a lot of places you can learn about, what to buy. And, that's an easier decision probably. But the most difficult decision for people to take is when to sell. And, and that is true for, whether you are a momentum trader or whether you are a fundamental trader, this decision you need to take some point in time. And this is what I've been thinking before getting into a podcast as well, that even for a fundamental trader, probably a decision to sell can be based on the momentum also, right? Where you can actually protect yourself from a big drawdown. You're basically worried about a big drawdown, right? I mean, 10
Yes.
20% everybody has to keep in
Yes.
mind that it can happen, but a big drawdown can protect. So any thoughts you have on what a general exit principle people can follow?
So there are practitioners who have married, fundamental investing with momentum investing. So they will have initial filters wherein they will be filtering based on their fundamental parameters, and then whatever subset they get, then they allocate those towards the momentum picks. Uh, and then exit based on some momentum exits of certain either some parameter or some percentage fall or some ATR or some sort of a hard calculatable parameter. uh, Now in conventional fundamental investing, that is very difficult to do, because I mean, you have so many variables which are going on at the same time. Global macro, local macro, industry wide, then interest rate movements, your exchange rate movements, systematic your market risk. uh, there are so many moving parts, and once the market starts let's say March 2020, market starts to tank. uh, all those reasons why you bought the stock are still intact. Good quality management, prospects, this, that. How do you take a decision to get out? So I think it's difficult to marry the two unless you have a very clinical approach and you're using fundamentals only sort of as a filter to get better stocks into your selection. But if your basic approach is fundamental, then I think getting technicals or momentum or exit rules into that will disturb your basic sort of fundamental thinking uh, about the concept of long term investing. I mean, Amazon, Apple, they've had
Yeah.
80% drawdowns. If you were able to get out at 2030, maybe you will not be able to get in again.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, that's a tough one. The approach has to be more first clinical, and then maybe you can add on a value add of I want better stocks in my selection, so I'll have a fundamental filter on top of that.
Yeah. No, I think interesting. So, I've been following few people, and, the there is a lady called Beth Kidding. She writes about tech stocks a lot, and they have a fund called IO Fund. So the PM is actually a technical guy. So she does all the research, and based on the research, they actually buy. But the person who's leading the whole investing, he takes decision using technical input as well. And the way I've seen that, I mean, they use that for entry strategies for sure, and they use that also to raise some cash sometimes, right? Whenever they think that overall market is looking a little wobbly, you want to raise 10-20% cash, then you use the technical analysis to raise some cash. And so they look out for it. I mean, he believes in, all those 5 waves and on those kind of elite waves theory. But they use that. So I've seen that. I mean, but you're right that I've not seen very successful cases for which can be really put down in a very simplistic way. Not easy.
Yeah. So my sense also is that once you have a sort of a watertight system, you don't want to have any ambiguity there. So as soon as you bring 15 variables, a lot of ambiguity comes into the system. And at the end of the day, you need also, everybody wants to blame somebody for the gain or the loss. And in my system, I can blame my system for it, right? I don't have to beat myself up. So in conventional investing, you'll either sell short of the top or buy higher than the bottom, and you'll always beat yourself up. Why did I do this? Why I could have waited this, that. In this kind of investing, that those questions do not arise. My system said buy, I bought. My system said sell, I sold. I couldn't help it. So that way it keeps you from beating yourself up.
I mean, now let's talk a bit about human psychology. And I think you mentioned quite a few places that strategy is 20% of the game and rest is staying the course. And somebody said that you only have to do few things right in your life, so long as you don't do too many wrong things, right? Or even bringing in Charlie Munger here, he said, all I want to know is where I'm going to die so that I don't go there, right? So how do you, keeping this whole 80% is all about psychology, and we all know about greed and fear, the biggest enemies of investing. How do you want to talk about that 80% of the human psychology part, and what's been your learning? You've been investing for a long period of time.
So my learning, and that could be unique to my case, has been that whenever I was doing investing in the conventional mode, discretionary mode, my psychology, when I was pushed against the wall in stressful situations, got the better of me, in the sense of I sort of gave up at that point and said, okay, let's dump this stock, or let's not go this way. Even with my initial hypothesis having been different, but that stress situation caused me to alter my short-term decision on that investment, and not once, on several occasions. So despite having a good strategy, the psychology basically let you down at that point of time, because of uncertainty around what will happen tomorrow. If a stock, let's say, keeps going down, or if it starts to bottom here and move up, you don't know how you will react in the next part of the event, because you are not sure about how things will pan out and how you will react to it. So there is multiple sort of connotations to that. Whereas in the very simple sort of follow the rule sort of military like rule fashion, is that I'll do what I'm told to do, and I'll follow that. So you are kind of giving up your control, in the sense, and that requires a lot of a change in your psychology towards, like in the conventional versus this price action based theory. In the conventional investing, you are in a way saying that these are my assumptions A, B, and C, and I see the stock to do these are the prospects based on my assumptions, right? The market is telling you otherwise, but you are saying, no, I think the market is wrong. And based on my assumptions, this should do this, right? So this is one sort of a thought process. And the other thought process is that, no, the market is always right. The BBC principle, Bhav Bhagwan Che, and I'm going to follow the market. When the market tells me it is right to buy, I'll buy it then. So you're allowing your own psychology to be, not in control or not in command, but you're allowing others to tell you how you should react. So it's a whole very different sort of a total approach in terms of your psychology. And I usually feel that even within my products, for instance, if I were to analyze how people have done in the last 5 years who have used my products, some of them or many of them who come in at the market tops, let's say people who came in at the market tops, even with the strategy in place, they were not able to do well because they could not survive 6 months of a drawdown. They came in with the notion that we are here for 5 years, but as soon as they got a 6 months of drawdown, they gave up, right? So the strategy was not important. The strategy was not even 20% there. It was all about their psychology, how they are going to approach this problem at hand. So you can give the best strategy to the person, but how he will execute it, how he will approach it is another ballgame.
So let's now, that our podcast is called Breaking Investment Stereotypes. You've been involved in investing for more than 2 decades now. Any stereotype you think you want to bring it up and which we should be breaking in here?
I think this whole concept of buy, hold, and forget it.
Yeah.
This is something that, especially in today's world, does not work. The average span of a company lasting, or its lifetime has gone down dramatically since the last 50 years. There are some US statistics on this. I think the average span of S&P 500 company has gone down from like 45 years to maybe like 25 years or 20 years, something like that. So the whole idea of, every industry going through a disruption in some way or the other, has that speed of that happening has multiplied many folds in the last couple of decades. So there is really no moat which can protect you for forever.
Yep.
Capital used to be scarce. It is not scarce anymore. There's talent. There's this movement of talent across geographical boundaries. There is no scarcity of anything actually.
Yep.
So and we've seen this in the last 20 years, how industries and companies have just got disrupted despite having decades and centuries of moat. So you cannot sit on those laurels anymore, and you need some sort of a mechanism of evaluation of where you're going. And if there are 50 variables in your equation, then that's a very difficult evaluation to do. And price, being a leading indicator of many things, like, in fact, there was a very interesting study that was published in the Live Mint once, that what is the composition of, let's say the market moves 100% in a year. What is the composition of that relative to pre-earning season, during earning season, and post-earning season? How much of the moves happen in these three segments across 20 years of data that they presented? And very, very interestingly, in the US markets, it was, I think, 40% during earning season and 40% post-earning season, and only 20% pre-earning season. In Indian markets, it was 76% pre-earning season and about 13% uh, or 12% each in the during earnings and post earnings. So
Okay.
it tells you, how our markets function vis-a-vis the global market. I mean, we are able to discount things much ahead of earnings.
Yeah.
And that's why momentum is even a much better sort of play where the price is leading the news. And in many in so many situations you will find good results, price has already moved, bad results, price has already moved. I mean, it is just that the price is moving and people are saying why this is moving, what has happened, and that why and what gets released after 3 months or whatever it may be. So from that perspective, this was a very interesting study that I had come across, and so this is something that needs to change. Times have changed, and buy and hold, while it can work for wonders for people, there is no surety about it. We are always reminded of success stories. Aisha Motor went 50 times, and Bajaj Finance did this, and so on and so forth. But there is a huge selection bias in this approach. And buy and hold, if you were doing buy and hold across those 6,000 stocks, you would get nowhere. So,
Yeah.
so that is one stereotype that I'm not so
Yeah.
comfortable with.
I'll probably add there that if you're buying stock based on fundamental analysis, then be ready to at least go through their results every quarter, or you just believe in that price captures everything and just go with the price moment, right? Which is basically momentum trading. So be very clear what are you buying the stock for. Now let's get into a little bit of your about you as a person. Who are the traders or investors you admire? I mean, from current or previous or whatever, either in India or globally.
So I haven't. Let me say that I don't read too many books, and that is my sort of shortcoming in life. That after my academics, I sort of gave up on reading books, and I said, maybe let's only concentrate on what I can absorb by by seeing something, and that all my sort of concepts got visualized by seeing. And there's a very small interesting story. I'm deviating from the topic, but when I coined these momentum strategies, I had not read a book about momentum investing. So in 2014-15, when I was doing this, I thought, I've really discovered something really great, and I don't know why nobody's talked about this so far. And then when other people told me, and I got to know, there's so much tons of research around this, and this is an established system. Anyhow, so a lot of momentum oriented or trade oriented traders. Earlier, I had some readings about turtle traders, Richard Dennis, of that era, and then later on, of course, the champions from the books from Jack Schwager or even Mark Minervini. I mean, all these are champion traders, and basically what they have emphasized everything is that you have to be very strong mentally, and it is more of a mental and a discipline game. So again, coming back, that the strategy is not so important. The strategy is not the holy grail. The holy grail is inside you, as to how you can approach the problem and stick to a disciplined approach.
Okay, interesting. Since you said you don't read too many books, let me ask, what do you enjoy then outside trading?
I actually enjoy my work a lot. Let me say, and I don't trade much.
But you said you only work over the weekend, right? So what do you do on the weekdays then?
So the investing part gets taken care of in 15 minutes.
Okay.
But this entire advisory that I've taken on, and hundreds and thousands of people who are asking questions at all times, and the interaction over Twitter. Actually, the Twitter part, maybe it is sort of an addiction as well. But I think that interaction is very, very sort of unique in terms of I'm learning so much every day. from so many people there. And that I think amazes me, and I really like to interact with so many of the newcomers who are coming, and they're asking questions based on my experience, and I'm able to sometimes share some thoughts which may not be there. Like for instance, stories like, if you go to pre-DMAT era, when I was having a broking house in Delhi, my manager actually used to fill up a suitcase full of physical shares, take the Rajdhani, go to Mumbai, and do the paying of those shares.
Wow.
And 3 days later, the payout, the clearing house would give him a physical payout worth of the big suitcase, and he would take the train back and come to the office, then spend 2 days in stamping and making sure each of those physical documents reaches each client's house. I mean, these kind of stories are unheard of in today's generation. So I really enjoy a lot of my work, and free time, of course, some movies, or I like to walk a lot. So when COVID allows, and we have some nice parks around here, so I go out for very long walks. So that is something which I really like to do.
Actually, you mentioned about Twitter, and Twitter is really addictive. I was not much into Twitter. I quit my job in Jan 2020. Before that, being in a bank, very difficult to write something in your own name, right? So I was not active at all. And then I started becoming active once I was a free man. And it really amazes me the amount of knowledge which is there on Twitter, and free, the free knowledge
Yes,
which is available.
absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
unbelievable.
It's
Unbelievable.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, I have so many people write to me that, we've been able to absolutely change our approach to the market just because we were, somehow we came to know about your Twitter handle and we started to follow it. And this thought process have made me realize that, this type of investing suits me well. And, it's totally changed my perspective. So when I hear that kind of stories and success stories amongst them, that really gives me, a real big kick, that just by a few tweets here and there, you're actually impacting, somebody's long-term vision and long-term strategy towards their growth. Um, so that, yeah, I mean, and people are approachable on Twitter. I mean, you are able to ask questions and approach anybody on Twitter, and you get a response, and that's just amazing. I mean,
Yep,
that's
it is. We are coming towards the close of our podcast now. There's a couple of more things I need to ask. What's you mentioned about when somebody is young, he should probably write down the thoughts behind what the either investing or the trading they've done. How do you approach your own journaling? I mean, do you have a formal process of journaling things, or how do you do?
Yeah, so last 20 years, I don't think I've done any investment without journaling it. So what I started doing in somewhere in 2002 3, when I was trading a lot, I used to write a blog to myself every day after trading, that this is what I did. So those kind of the blogging websites where you need not make the blog public, but you can have it for yourself. So I used to religiously write a half a page blog to myself. This is what I did. These are the trades that I took. This is where I think I went wrong, and I should improve this. So there was an analysis period of half an hour every day, and which at the end of the week, or at the end of the month, you are counting, okay, this month this was my return. And in trading, you can do it on a monthly basis. So where did I go wrong, and how many times did this mistake? So having a good journal is extremely important, especially for trading. And even for investing, I think uh, like conventional investors who, let's say, buy mutual funds, etc., I can guarantee you 80% of the people don't know exactly what are their returns, and what are their returns compared to industry averages of their subsegment in those mutual funds. Let's say somebody is investing large caps. So is he generating 12% versus industry average of 11.5? or something like that. So that metrics is not there because, somehow because of the advertising, etc., you are convinced that you've invested and now you're safe and everything's going hunky-dory. So having periodic assessment and despite, the companies will send you performance, but you need to have a handle on that. What is your internal rate of return, etc., and how different allocations could have that scenario building. If I had allocated this much to gold and this much to debt, or how could it have been? I think that kind of homework a lot of people don't want to do. I mean, they just want to set aside some money and give it either to a fund manager or to a PMS manager and sort of get rid of that problem. I'm a very strong believer that unless you put your hand in it, you will not really gain much out of it. I mean,
Absolutely.
you cannot. I mean, there's no free lunches here. I mean, you offer your money to somebody else, you will make returns, but there will be nominal returns. I mean, you will not do anything great there. So you need to get yourself involved, and even if you need to get some advisor to handhold you for a few years, you need to take off on your own also at some point of time. So I think that is a journey that happens with disciplined approach towards journaling, and even I think one very important thing that I forgot to mention here is that journaling can be done in public. You should do your journaling in public. I was doing it in private, but I learned later that you can do your journaling in public. So let's say, I mean, you don't want to give out your absolute portfolio values. That's fine, but give out your percentages of gain or loss. Put out your performance in percentage gain loss. That this is what I've done. Maybe somebody will help you. Maybe somebody will encourage you to do better. Maybe somebody will get motivated by your performance, and you will feel accountable that yes, I have to journal myself every day because yes, I did it yesterday, I did day before yesterday. What will people say if I don't do it today? So there is a pressure, there's self-inflicted pressure that I need to do it. So that happens when you have a public eye on what you're doing. Like we do a weekly report on our performance. There is no need to do it, right? But I spend many hours on a Friday night doing that because I have a self-inflicted pressure on me that I need to get this report out today. Whatever I've been the performance, that is regardless of whether it was a good, bad, or ugly report, that needs to go out today, and I need to report this. This is my practice. This is the discipline that I need to have. So I think that journaling,
you're right,
really helps.
Yeah, and people underestimate the and I used to tell all the young guys in our firm as well that please do write, because when you write, you actually learn yourself. It's not about for somebody else. It's just for your learning that you should write. So I think that's super important.
I think writing on Twitter itself has been such a a life-changing activity for me. I mean, the more I write, the more I'm able to express myself. And these are just thoughts that are coming to me. I probably tweet 50 times in a day, but I consider these as liberating thoughts coming out of me, and I don't really care what anybody will say about it. I mean, these are my thoughts, and I want to journal them on Twitter. Yeah. So that's how journaling can help, really.
Yeah. So I'll come to the last question, and then this is what we ask every every guest: what advice you will give to your 20-year-old self? So suppose you are starting now as a 20-year-old guy, and what advice you will give especially from the investing point of view?
I think to myself, I should have read more. I did not read about what I was going to do, and I just jumped into the business without any experience. I should have read more and possibly read more about price action based theories without spending a decade trying to do fundamental investing, then coming to this. So so that's that would have been my sort of take on my 20-year-old.
Okay. Thank you, Alok. Thanks for being part of this. For our listeners, to follow very popular Twitter handle of Alok Jain. Tell me if I'm saying it correctly. It's called Weekend One Vesting. Is that it is, or because you mentioned it's not I?
It is a weekend investing with no I after the I. after the T.
After T. Okay. So it is
Yeah,
weekend @weekend investing, but no I after. So it's TNG instead of TING.
TNG.
Yeah. So
Yes.
do
Somebody
follow.
took my.
Yeah. do follow him. Writes a lot, as he said, and I've been a follower of your Twitter handle.
Thank you. Thank you.
And please, for our listeners, do share and with your friends and families about our podcast, and we will see you next time.
Surely. Thank you so
Thanks,
much, Raj.
Alok.
Thank you.